you use the term guaranteed coverage, because if it's guaranteed coverage, it's an advertorial. It's not earned media.
A few people made comments on social media that were inaccurate. It was an extremely stressful time. 2 members of our team were publicly named online. They were very, very upset by the whole process of being sort of publicly outed for something that was completely inaccurate. We could have been more transparent over time. There's no question about that. On this particular day, every single plate fell, crashed, smashed into 1,000 tiny pieces. And I ended up with what I thought at the time was the world's worst news list. So I then had to present literally minutes later in front of the editor of the day. The editor at the time screwed up all of the news schedules from the desk, threw them in my face.
Welcome to Embracing Marketing Mistakes, the podcast where we turn other people's marketing fails into brilliant and valuable lessons for you. I'm Chris Norton, your host, ready to dive into today's episode, which promises to be fascinating for anyone wanting to smash a huge campaign anytime soon. Today, I'm excited to say we've got a bit of an exclusive for you. Last week, we interviewed Chris Pharo, CEO of 72 Point. Now, if you don't know who 72 Point are, it is a multi-service content agency which describes itself as harnessing unrivaled media relationships and know-how to develop creative and strategic campaigns to generate mass media coverage. And I feel like this is the first podcast we've ever done actually on what I do, which is PR. So today we are talking about the media landscape and how it's changed. And Chris has been navigating the media landscape for more than 20 years, initially as a journalist and then as an associate editor and head of news at the Sun newspaper. So he's seen firsthand how rapidly things have changed in the media, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worst. He joins us to discuss how earned media is evolving, what it can take to build meaningful media relationships today in the media landscape, and why it's time to break away from the old school traditional PR playbook to embrace disruptive storytelling. We'll also hear about a high-profile promise they made that didn't go quite as planned, and how this led to some negative media headlines and a bit of a social media storm. Chris talks us through that difficult situation and explains how this led to a complete overhaul of 72 Point's approach to comms. So, if you've ever felt frustrated by outdated marketing tactics or struggled to get your brand story heard properly, this episode will give you the tools to rethink your strategy and start building more impactful media relationships. So as always, sit back, relax, and let's learn how to navigate the new rules of media engagement one step at a time. Enjoy! Welcome to the show, Chris Pharo. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Chris. Good to meet you. Good to meet you too, Will. And thanks very much for the opportunity to come on your podcast.
Yeah, we've been excited to speak to you because you're from a business called 72 Point. We've used 72 Point before at Prohibition for a few campaigns because we've been going like 13, 14 years. So we have used it for a few consumer-y campaigns. But do you want to, before we get into who 72 Point are, what they do and how it operates, do you want to just tell us a little bit about your background? Because it's quite interesting. You worked for the Sun newspaper from 2002, right? Do you just want to tell us a little bit about how you got into that?
Sure. Oh, how I got into it. I sort of fell into it, to be honest. I wanted to be a journalist from a very young age. I ended up working on a local paper. The local district reporter from the Sun, I handed him a few stories. He introduced me up the chain, and then I started. When I actually started at the Sun, I was, I think, the youngest reporter on Fleet Street at that stage. So pretty green in my very early 20s. And then it went on from there. I had an aptitude for it, I suppose, and basically went up the ladder. I was on the Sun for about 25 years. All told, 12 of them as head of news, which was a really interesting period of my career. It was under several editors. I was head of news under Rebecca Brooks for a long time. Yes. I was also on the news desk during David Yellen's editorship. I was staff on the Sun when Kelvin McKenzie was the editor and Stuart Higgins. And then eventually Dominic Mohan and David Dinsmore taking over, which was when I left the paper.
And what does for anyone that doesn't know, do you know what does head of news involve then? Are you there looking, just making those editorial decisions on what the paper runs each day? Is that how it works?
Yeah, in essence, we obviously every paper is divided into subsections. So you've got a news section, you've got a feature section, sport, and I oversaw the news operation, which was basically trying to find great stories on a daily basis to fill the pages of the Sun. And at that point, it was very heavily print first. We were selling 3.5 million copies a day at that point. And so my job was to come in very early in the morning, put together a news list and present that to the editor at the 11:30 conference. I can tell you a story about that if you're interested, the sort of pressure, I think, because I think this is quite important for the nature of this podcast, is to kind of understand the pressure that journalists are under, particularly news editors. So there was a day when I had what I can only describe as the sort of perfect storm of news editing, right? News editing is a bit like spinning plates. You've got 30 or 40 stories constantly on the go, knowing that you're going to have to find 15 good ones a day or great ones a day in order to make a brilliant edition of the paper. And on this particular day, every single plate fell, crashed, smashed into 1,000 tiny pieces. And I ended up with what I thought at the time was the world's worst news list, which of course I then had to present literally minutes later in front of the editor of the day. And I actually showed it to one of my colleagues. He said to me, "You look ashen-faced." And I said, "This is the world's worst news list." And he said, "Oh, it can't be that bad." And he took a look at it and he went ashen-faced as well and said, "Well, good luck with that." Anyway, cutting a long story short, I thought I'd make light of the fact that it was the world's worst news list. In conference, it didn't go terribly well. The editor at the time screwed up all of the news schedules from the desk, threw them in my face. And by the time I got back to my desk, and each had sent an email to 3,500 members of staff at the Sun, including everybody, including people working in the canteen and the cleaning department and the entire building, asking if anybody had any stories because the news editors couldn't find any. Which gives you, it's different today. That I'm talking the sort of mid-2000s when this kind of stuff happened.
Heyday. The media heyday, basically.
It was the media heyday. And in fairness, if you're a news editor and you turn up at conference without any stories, you deserve it. Now, I'm sure that I'm not sure it doesn't happen, but I suspect it doesn't happen today. But it gives an example of the kind of pressure that news editors are under. These are the people that, the PR agencies and creatives across the board are trying to cut through with. These are the people that they're trying to persuade to publish their content. So it's really challenging. I can remember thinking that I wouldn't put it on the last page lead in the paper. I can remember thinking that before I walked in. It was a grim day, but as I say, I probably deserved it.
So you said that it was 3.5 million people were buying the Sun, and it was like the newspaper of choice. It was driving elections.
Yes.
But today, how does the Sun sit today? Is the sun set on the Sun, or is it? Because for me, working in PR, I think we believe that everybody's still reading the media, but just sit on a tube, sit on a train. And when I lived in London and worked in London, everybody was reading the Metro or the Sun or the Standard. Now everyone's reading their phone. And the interesting bit about that is people are now saying people are distracted, they're reading their phones. But back in the heyday, everyone had the newspaper out. Anyway, they were reading something because, let's face it, sat on the tube is boring. So my question is, where is the Sun today, do you think, compared to where it was when you were there?
Well, I mean, clearly its circulation has gone down significantly. The Sun doesn't publish its circulation numbers publicly any longer, but popular reports suggest that they're selling less than 1 million copies a day. And that isn't, of course, just the Sun. The simple truth is circulations have plummeted at pretty much every print edition of the national media. And they've all moved to this strategy of switching to online. But one of the major challenges about online journalism is it's incredibly hard to monetize. People are blind to online ads, so the ad dollar is fewer from people going onto online sites, whether that's the Sun or the Mail or indeed the Telegraph or the Guardian. The simple truth is that it's really hard to monetize online news, and if you're not behind a paywall, which most of the popular papers like the Sun aren't behind paywalls, it becomes a real challenge. And of course, the knock-on effect of that is that those economic problems that are being faced by those publishers ultimately lead to dramatic cuts in staffing, editorial staff at most of the publishers. I mean, this time last year, Reach laid off, as I'm sure you recall, some in the region of 350 journalistic staff. And
Terrible,
what that really means for, absolutely. And what that really means for anybody in the PR industry is that it becomes increasingly difficult to find the people that you can send your releases to, or that you can go after in a media relations fashion, which causes a huge amount of frustration in the industry. And I get it. I really understand that. I would say that I was reading some statistics yesterday that suggest that online media is now more prevalent in news gathering than broadcast for the first time. So more people are reading news online than getting their news for broadcast for the first time. So I do think digital media, online media, is really, really important. And I think that conundrum as to how the publishing industry is going to monetize and support those models is a really important one. And I don't just think it's important for publishing. I think it's important for the PR industry as well. Because I think, to your point, Chris, I agree with it entirely. When you are sat on a train carriage now, you can see everybody looking at their smartphones. Quite often they're playing a game or, online shopping perhaps. But those that are getting their news through digital media, I think it's incredibly important that that we recognise the value of news, and I think consumers out there are still interested in the news. It's just a question of how publishers reach them and with the kind of quality of the content that they're using, really.
But the point I was making is the Sun, because I've been in PR for my whole life, right? Not my whole life, but my working life. And the Sun was always the number one newspaper. And and I'm not going to lie, right? Whoever's out there, I used to write a blog called Dead Dinosaur because I believed that the industry was dying. The media was killing itself because it didn't move quick enough. The newspapers were so old school. Right, you'll have been there when the newspapers digital was led by a couple of the newspapers saw it and jumped on it. Everybody else just sat back and thought, "Oh, we're not doing anything." They did a little bit of trying to create some websites with news and etc. But it was so slow compared to every other industry. And only now do I feel like for the last 5 or 6 years they've gone, shit, yeah. Really? Because they tried paywalls. They all tried paywalls. And I think the Sun and the Times were News Corp were one of the first ones to try it. But it was too early for that. Whereas now you've got like Forbes and you've got some of the other publications that, they lead with a story. You get the first 2 paragraphs, and then it's like, if you want, pay your £2 a month subscription. So, but my issue with a newspaper like the Sun is it was so powerful back then when you were there. And today, I feel like the real one is either Daily Mail, which unfortunately, or the BBC. And they're the ones that are controlling where everybody's going. I don't know I'd love to see the percentage of content of news that is the BBC now. That people consume compared to 20 years ago.
Yeah, look, I agree with you, and I think that the BBC and the Mail Online were early adopters of an online strategy. To answer your question, and I agree with you. I think that the papers were very slow to adopt online models. And I think the main reason for that is it's very difficult to protect content online without it being ripped off. Whereas if you've got a newspaper in the morning that's full of great stories with a great front page splash, you have to buy that newspaper in order to read that content. It's very difficult for the papers to compete with that. Now, of course, in an online environment, great exclusives are exclusive for about 30 seconds because every single online publisher will rip off that content. So the advantage that the broadsheets have got in this area, of course, is that people aren't buying them because of great breaking exclusives. I mean, obviously the Sun and papers like it, the Mirror, the Star have always, have always traded on sort of great showbiz, salacious showbiz stories, that kind of stuff. Obviously, the broadsheets don't go down that road. People are buying the broadsheets for considered, well-written, thoughtful journalism, as opposed to simply breaking news and great exclusive stories, which is the problem that I think those tabloids face. I think the Mail Online is a remarkable success story in terms of its early adoption of an online strategy. I would agree with that entirely.
So if we look back, I mean, it's probably worth delving into what makes a news story and news value. So clearly, well, I don't know, 2002, what made a news story in 2002 versus 2024? So how's that changed? And you talked about this more shift towards more considered, opinion-led content. As a brand, as a PR, what do we need to be thinking about now to cut through in this kind of fragmented landscape?
Sure. Well, I mean, I could spend this entire podcast talking about that, Will. But in very simple terms, the difference is during my period of time on the Sun, news editors had sort of if you were any good at the job, it's because you understood your readership and the kind of content that those readers wanted on a daily basis. So when you put out a newspaper, it was kind of a shot to nothing, but the sales kept coming in. The only real measure you had of the success of any given paper was when the circulation figures came in. And that did kind of guide your thinking. You knew that certain stories about certain people would sell better than stories about others. And so that would guide the way, the sort of directional nature of how you went about your work. Nowadays, of course, pretty much every single news editor is accompanied by an audience expert who can watch in real time how stories perform. And that opens up a whole new series of questions in terms of online publishing and journalism. Because today, I think that the sort of reporter, as I would describe them, and most people would describe them, I think, is sort of morphing gradually into more of an editor. Many of the journalists on the online editions of newspapers now, they've got quotas of stories to fill because the publication wants to have a certain number of stories published every day. They're sort of voracious content machines. And not only that, they're also expected to achieve minimum page views on some publishers. They are sort of being measured on the efficacy of the content that they're producing. So when you put stuff in like that, what you kind of get is a much more sort of mechanized approach, if you will, rather than rather than sort of instinctive guesswork coming in. You've actually got hard data directing your decision making, and you're under real pressure. And that sort of factory farming of content. Ultimately, I don't agree with the strategy of some of the national media in that regard, but I can understand why they're doing it, and it's why big content suppliers now are very important to the publishing world.
So if you're a marketer now, this year, so moving into 2025, we're nearing the end of 2024. I can't believe I'm saying that. If you're a marketer in 2025. And you want to get coverage for a story, what's gonna work? Because a lot of people don't have PR experience or journalist experience like me and you. What do you think they need in their brand story to get coverage in the modern digital? Because we hear a lot, right, when we speak to journalists, research stories are dead. Right, so that's interesting. We'll move into what you guys do next. Mm-hmm. But that we get that a lot from journalists, like statistics. A poll is dead. So what do you feel is the coming ahead to get coverage? What can a marketer do in 2025 to get coverage?
Yeah, well, let me answer your second question first, and I know we'll come on to it in a bit more detail later, Chris. But I don't believe that research stories are dead if they're done properly. And I think you've only got to look at the national media on a daily basis to see that. They're still being published in great volume. However, coming back to your point, what does a marketer need to do? I think there is both. I think you hit the nail on the head in the way you mentioned it. You talked about the story, and it is all about storytelling. I think this has been the case for as long as I've been involved in PR, and obviously going back much longer. This is about telling stories. We are all in the storytelling business, and I think all too often marketers and PR people can be drawn too far into the process. Right? Basically, journalists are very unlikely to care about your brand. They won't care about your brand's message. They don't care about your brand's latest launch or campaign. What they're interested in is stories. I have a former colleague called Doug Shields, who you may have come across, who I've got a huge amount of respect for. And he told me a very simple point when I first started at 72 Point. He said whenever he gets a journalist on the phone, he always uses one first sentence, which is, "I've got a story for you." And I think that advice is really, really important, because you have to offer journalists, particularly in the sort of straitened times that we're in for all the reasons we've discussed, when there are far fewer of them under a great deal of pressure to produce lots and lots of content, you've got to persuade them you've got a story. Being more specific about trying to land coverage in digital, it is very clear that every single story in digital is asset rich. So whether that's a great set of pictures or a brilliant video or a digital design asset or all three. And those ideas, those stories should lend themselves to that kind of visual storytelling, in our opinion. And actually, Chris, coming back to your point in terms of research stories are dead, which I've been hearing since I first started at 72 Point.
Me too.
The reality is elevating those stories through the use of those assets. So effectively using data more as a tool for insight to create a creative spark, if you will, that leads you on to produce that much more effective digital content. Which
infographics, stuff like that.
I think infographics are a bit one-dimensional. We do some quizzes and things like that, sort of interactive quizzes, which are quite effective in the space. A great gallery of pictures. You talked about Mail Online. A great gallery of pictures will help with Mail Online, and I think each publisher is different as well. I think you need to recognise what the different aims of those digital publishers are. I often challenge the team at 72 Point to find me a story online that doesn't include a suite of assets with it, mainly because you won't find one. Whether that's the BBC or the Mail Online.
So we talk about storytelling a lot. Do you want to bring it to life for us a little bit and give us an example of how a brand might tell a story in the media and the role research can potentially play in that?
A project I've seen in the last few days coming out of Mischief, where they've sort of jumped on the whole Oasis revival, and they've done a project using some research talking about 90s crisps that are coming back in fashion. It's everywhere. It's literally appeared in every single national publication in the last couple of days, from the Sun to the Guardian and everything in the middle. So it is elevated because it is visual. You have to use the pictures of the crisp, right? And we've all got, our favourite retro crisp. It seems remarkably reductive, but our experience is these kind of issues do very well. We've had some real results in that kind of area ourselves over the last few weeks. We've also discovered that there's an increasing trend of anything that involves Gen Z is really interesting in this space as well. But bringing stuff to life, look, I think it comes down to a great set of pictures. If a campaign's got a really, really good set of pictures that goes with it, or indeed actually brilliant case studies, all too often we see projects go out that are talking about quite serious issues that aren't brought to life by an absolutely cracking case study that can really elevate that and make it a very successful piece of content, both for the marketer, but more importantly, and I think this is a key point, it has to work for the publisher.
Okay.
That comes back to the core point, I think. So
do you want to tell us a bit about 72 Point then and what you do? Because 72 Point, my experience, we've used them, as I said at the beginning of the pod, we've used them probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 times. We've used you guys. We've worked alongside when we're doing a bigger campaign as part of we've used you as like a part of a tactical element of a wider strategy. So we might be doing a big series of campaigns every year. We might use you for one and then use some of the stuff that we've done for broadcast and et cetera, et cetera. Do you want to, but what was interesting to me is before you joined, Chris, I don't know how they were positioned before, but I don't remember them you guys being positioned as a PR agency. When I first used them, they weren't described as that, and I can't remember when that changed. So maybe you can answer that as well. When that happened, that'd be interesting.
Well, I think I'd qualify that. I don't think we see ourselves as a PR agency. I think we see ourselves as a creative content agency that does some PR.
Right.
So ultimately, our evolution has gone from doing the kind of research-based news generation you're referring to, Chris, which I entirely accept sections of the industry think is cliched. But we've developed that over time to make our content more digital friendly by adding the kind of assets that I've just talked about. I think that ultimately in this space we're developing our services as at our clients' behest, really, as we're growing as a business, as we're retaining different clients. Those clients are saying to us that they're asking us to effectively test our legs a bit. So we have brought some more creative expertise into the business, but at our heart, we are about creating content. I suppose the only evolution, Chris, from the business that I joined 8 years ago is it still does research-based news generation, but it does other stuff as well. And it's about constantly enhancing that output, really, so that we're sort of staying with the way that the media is changing.
Yeah. So because the media is changing, and so some would say it's a great idea, a philosophy on the business that you've built. So to explain how my understanding of how you work, I think how we got involved was you've got a research company that is part of the group called OnePoll.
Yeah.
And they do market research with Omnibus survey, 1,000, 2,000 people in the UK. So a PR agency might use the research company to craft a series of questions that will give you a news hook, right? I think that's maybe how we came in to use you guys originally. And then you've got 2 or 3 other businesses under that umbrella, don't you? You have a design agency, Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So OnePoll is part of the business, and we use them to produce the data that we use for news hooks, essentially at 72 Point. But we've built out our services. We now have Oath Design, which is our design studio, principally making the digital assets I referred to earlier. And we also acquired Pimpep last year, who, in my opinion, are the best PR photographers in the business. And we brought them in for the same reason. Effectively, we want to elevate our campaigns with great assets, and that's what those guys do. The vast majority of Pimpep's work, however, is being done for other creative agencies who are fully in that PR agency space, who are doing fully integrated campaigns, and we provide a service to those clients.
So I when I explain to some clients, because they don't know who the Press Association are, mm-hmm. Are the Press Association then essentially a competitor of 72 Point? Is that right?
I don't think we view them as competitors. They're a similar business, because obviously our sister company is SWNS.
Yeah.
So the way that we do our business, I think there's been quite a lot of confusion over this over time, and I have to say we perhaps haven't been as transparent as we might have been on the subject. What we do is we craft page-ready content. So a brief will come in from a client, whether that's an agency like your own, Chris, or a brand, occasionally direct. And that brief, we will come back with an answer. So we'll create that news hook or that creative idea that we think is going to land in the media. And we often talk about how we've got 2 clients, one that's paying us, but also the publishers. And we're always very, very focused on what we'll make within the media. So we'll come up with that idea. What then happens is a process of media testing with our colleagues at SWNS. So every idea that we come up with, we bounce off them, we refine, and then we hone, principally because they won't put anything on the SWNS wire that hasn't gone through that really lengthy, important process, because the integrity of the SWNS wire is everything. And our content goes out on the wire effectively as fully formed, page-ready news content with the assets all with it. And I think there's a lot of confusion about the wire. The wire is essentially a sort of closed email system through which we send content from SWNS directly into the news desks of over 100 publications, national, regional, and increasingly international. So that content feed is incredibly important to the publishers. PA is similar, but PA is the shareholders at PA are all of the publishers. So it sits apart from us really in that regard, and I think it plays a very different role than SWNS does. They're similar in that they both have a wire, but we don't perceive PA as
Yeah, because a lot of marketers won't know what a newswire is. A newswire, for those that don't know, is a service where you can send your press releases to a newswire. You can pay the newswire. They'll take your press release, I don't know, for a certain amount of money, and then they will send it out on a newswire, and it can get some coverage. Sometimes it could, depending on the strength. Again, it's as to what you were just saying, Chris. It's down to the strength of the story. If it's completely a sales-orientated story, then it's probably not going to get as much coverage as if it's an absolutely fascinating story and you put it on any newswire. There's several different newswires, from PR Newswire to yours to PA. There's numerous ones.
Are SWN, so that I can understand the relationship between all these companies, are SWNS objective in as far as the stories they take, in the way that you'd imagine a news editor on The Sun would be objective? Or do they critically appraise a story you would give them and only put out what they deem to be of editorial merit?
Absolutely, 100%. SWNS has very, very strict editorial guidelines, and our processes. So 72 Point and SWNS are run independently. And that crossover is a really, really important part of our business. So 72 Point will create its work, but ultimately that work then goes to SWNS, and they will push back on anything they do not believe is editorially robust or newsworthy. So, and this is a daily. Before I sat down to do the podcast, I can see 4 or 5 stories that are in progress. And the back and forth between the editorial teams at SWNS and 72 Point is incredibly robust. And just on your point about press releases, Chris, I think what 72 Point does is it creates ideas that we believe are extremely newsworthy and therefore going to get picked up. And I think that's why we've run into trouble over using phrases like guaranteed coverage, which was lazy on our part, because we're not guaranteeing coverage. What we are guaranteeing coverage, but what we left out of that was saying we guarantee coverage or we will pay your money back. We got quite lazy about the use of the phrase, and we weren't the only people who used it, obviously going back a few years. But that
I can see that's a problematic phrase, because I was going to say, obviously, from what you say, Southwest SWNS rather is objective, and it sounds like there's scenarios when you will seed them a story and it will get pushed back. They don't want it. So I suppose, how do you ensure that independence, I suppose, given that you're all part of the same group in effect? And how do you kind of communicate that? Because for me, communicating that message is so important, isn't it? And probably messages like guaranteed coverage undermine that independence. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think that is a fair point. And and obviously, we've learned a lot through this process. And I think that it's very clear that we could have been more open about our processes. And I'm sorry that we weren't. We could have been more transparent over time. There's no question about that. But to answer your question, that independence is key. And ultimately, SWNS provides a wire to the publishers. So the content on that wire has got to be absolutely first class. It's got to be strong content. It's got to be editorially robust. It's got to be newsworthy. So it is not in the interest of SWNS to put anything that would emanate from 72 Point that didn't tick all of those boxes. And we go through that process on a daily basis with them. So we reject far more content than we ever put on the wire. So you talk about press releases, Chris, and offering a wire service in that regard. We reject 95% of the content that is sent to us in that regard. So if somebody else comes up with an idea, we will reject that very often because we don't think it passes the necessary test for the wire.
For those of you that don't know what's happened, I'll explain. In October, was it October last year? A couple of PR people who I sort of know on Twitter talked about the fact that you use the term guaranteed coverage, and how can somebody guarantee coverage? Because if it's guaranteed coverage, it's an advertorial. It's not earned media. Now, for those marketers that listen, don't work in PR, do you really care about it? Well, if you're a PR person like I am, we're all about authenticity, earned media. That is a key part of what we do. And we say to a client, you can't just put a story out and it'll get published. That's the battle we PR people face all the time. We've got clients going, I want you to get me coverage about this story. And we go, okay, we need to craft a story around that. It's not just that. And if you want to get that in the press, you're going to have to pay for an advert, or you're going to have to do an advertorial. So I can see that. So that story sort of broke, that people said guaranteed coverage is not a thing. And PR Week did an article on the 17th of October, and several people had comments about it. So that's what we're talking about, isn't it, Chris? So what happened at your end then, in terms of how did you deal with that? What happened? Just walk me through what happened, and then where you're at.
Okay, so if you go back, you're right. It was last October, and what in actuality, what happened? A few people made comments on social media that were inaccurate, which effectively didn't understand our processes and how we go about our work. I think that some of those people had an agenda, but I completely understand that other people then picked up on that and ran with it. And I have to say it was an extremely stressful time at 72 Point. It was particularly challenging because two members of our team were publicly named online and pictured to extremely professional, hard-working young women within the team who, because we act with probity and completely ethically, that effectively they were very, very upset by the whole process of being sort of publicly outed for something that was completely inaccurate. PR Week picked up on the story because of the scale of comments on social media. And again, I come back to my point. We should have been more transparent about our processes leading up to that, because there is clearly a lack of understanding in the market about how we actually work. What we subsequently done is it did cause a great deal of introspection on our part. So we thought, we looked at ourselves. It came out of nowhere, really. We weren't expecting it. So we looked at ourselves and we brought in the industry expert, Stuart Bruce, who came into the business, and he conducted a 6-week review where we, with full openness within the business, full transparency, he looked at all of our processes, interviewed several members of the team, and I'm pleased to say that his report that he issued 6 weeks later said that we're not only ethical in what we do, we're actually ultra ethical, because in truth, the content that we're putting on the wire has to go through a really assiduous process before we get it there. We don't make claims in our content that we can't back up with evidence, for example, or indeed that our stories are always based on really robust research, and that's the beauty to an extent of working with a newswire, because it means we have to go through jump these multiple hurdles to get our content to the quality that we believe it is. And I think our coverage outcomes show on a daily basis.
Yeah, so I think that's where the confusion is, isn't it? Because people have seen that story and then they've gone, oh, right, okay. So I had a comment about someone sending I need to find it, where here we go. There's a lady called Iona who tweeted me, and she put, when I pitch a Reach PLC journalist, why do I get a reply from 72 Pointers account team asking if I want to buy their PR services? So that's what would we say to that? That's a valid question.
I've seen the tweets, so I saw the question you put out. Look, I think ultimately that's a very difficult question to answer without more information. However, what we do have occasionally is sometimes our team are bylined in the national media. Just briefly explaining why that happens. Half our team are trained writers, and they actually write the content. So because it's page ready, they author the stories that go out. And so sometimes they go on the wire with their byline on, and they then get used in the media. And sometimes creatives see those names in the media, assume that they are staff people at that publication, and reach out to them in that fashion. But I don't know if that's the case in this tweet. And if Iona wants to get in touch with me directly, I would be more than happy to look into it.
On that point, actually, so let's imagine a scenario where Prohibition has got 5 trained writers, journalists working for us. If they write a newsworthy bylined article and pitch it to Southwest News Service, is it plausible that we could be quoted? We could be bylined in the national media as well. Does that happen in other cases, or is it just, your writers that are bylined by SWNS?
Well, that's an interesting question in so much as I don't think that has ever happened. So, it's kind of hypothetical. I think the issue with any other PR agency, that generally the content is sent in, however well it's written, as a press release, and press releases need work, which is obviously one of the reasons that they represent a barrier to publication. On the assumption that you sent in a piece of extremely newsworthy, interesting content that had been written in the house style of SWNS and needed absolutely no work to put it on the wire, and they thought there was value in putting it on their wire, then I'm sure they would do. And they do. They do put stories out for other agencies occasionally. But I should be very clear on this point. Clearly we are sister companies, and, our business model does mean that 72 Point works extremely closely with SWNS, where, that's just the way the business operates. But
entirely independently as well.
It's under the same share ownership, Will, but we are run as sister companies. As I say, one of the things that Stuart Bruce looked into in his report was that editorial independence. Mm-hmm. And as I say, he's come out with a report that shows we're not only ethical, but we're compliant with the PRCA and the CIPR codes in terms of how we work. So he must have seen enough evidence of those editorial standards in process.
Yeah, and Stuart is a friend of the show. He's been on the show twice, which some people have been on twice, but he's one of the only 2 or 3 people that have. And he's my former boss, so I know how he operates, and I would trust his opinion if he's gone through, because I know what he's like. He'll be very diligent and have gone through everything, which is good. So you've answered that. I've got one other question, which was, someone said, what percentage... So because you mentioned earlier, right, that 95% of people that pitch to the SWNS Newswire get batted off. Sorry, that's not good enough. So somebody else said, okay, what percentage of your campaigns, 72 Points campaigns, fail? Because the point is, whatever 72 Point do, it always seems to get coverage. Is that true, or is that just one of the media misunderstandings? No, because it's all going on between the two. From what you've said this morning, it's like between the two, it's like, is this okay? No, it's not. You need to change that. Is that the relationship, the symbiotic relationship you're talking about?
Yeah, look, it very much is a symbiotic relationship, and I've seen the tweet again, and our business is set up that should we have a story that goes awry, we have got several options afterwards, right? We can flip it, right? One of our practices is that when we do research, we will often ask additional questions so that we've got another line that we can refresh a piece of content with. The Wire is enormously effective in terms of landing coverage for 72 Point. There is no question about that. And increasingly, as this process of reporters moving into sort of more closer to editing roles, that process is becoming even more straightforward because it's page ready wire written content. For example, you take Reach. Reach have a proprietary AI called Gutenbot, and there are two agencies that are plugged into Gutenbot and Reach, so the entirety of Reach. One is PA, the other is SWNS. And what Gutenbot does is that when this content arrives at Reach, Gutenbot will write 3 separate versions of that content, and it will send those 3 separate versions to the desk heads at Reach, the editors at Reach, to make a decision whether to publish or not. And when you've got the challenges I mentioned earlier, that you've got publications trying to hit quotas of content on a daily basis, if you've got a newswire that's producing 50 to 100 stories a day, and a very small number of those are properly researched, quality pieces of content in the way that 72 Point produces its work, then ultimately it's a seamless process towards publication. You haven't got that barrier in the middle that pretty much everybody else in the PR industry faces, which is ultimately why we achieve the coverage we do. I think, in the last month alone, we have had coverage, obviously across a sweep of tabloids, which is our core work, but we've had coverage in the Telegraph, the Guardian, the Times, all on several occasions, because we're building out the way that we operate at 72 Point as well, and focusing heavily on that quality, which again is something that I think is really important for our evolution. So to answer the question, I can't give you a specific percentage of how many of our projects fail. If they do fail, we go again and try to make sure that we improve them so that they reach the minimum KPIs we've agreed with the client. But they do occasionally fail. And if they do, we refund our clients 100% of the time. But the truth is, not many of our projects fail. That's the answer.
To what degree do you think this shitstorm is a result of frustrations within the industry when it comes to landing coverage and getting cut through?
I think it's partly that, and I think it's partly our lack of transparency. I think that, on a personal level, when I came into this business 8 years ago, I was pretty naive. Right? I didn't know much about PR. Some would argue I still don't know much about PR, and I wouldn't necessarily question that. I'm from a news background. 72 Point is quite a niche area of the market. We don't pretend to be anything else particularly. I think that naivety, for example, we didn't even have any FAQs on our website before this happened last October. And we should have had that. We should have been more open about and transparent about our processes. I wish I'd asked Stuart Bruce to conduct his review 2 years ago, because we'd have responded with that review, but I didn't feel it was necessary at the time, and that was an error on my part. But I do think it is partly born out of the frustrations that effectively, I think I've read statistics that suggest there are 7 PR people in this country to every journalist now. And as that PR funnel widens and the spout narrows, ultimately, it's going to become harder and harder for people to achieve coverage. And there we are, because of the way we work, because we have access to the SWNS wire, achieving coverage, day in, day out. And I accept that that's caused issues with some people, and I get it. And I do sympathise with those agencies that are putting out high quality work, because there are lots and lots of them.
Hello.
Well, exactly, Chris. But we see that pass our shores, and and there is a lot of stuff that I see on a daily basis that does deserve to be published. But as I say, the single biggest issue facing, I think, the PR industry is the parlous state of the publishing one.
And to add to your point there, Chris, is we've noticed in the last 12 months, there's now ability for PR agencies and others to upload their news directly to news outlets, which to me is mental. So I'm imagining that behind that gateway is another, what did you call it? It wasn't Gollum from Lord of the Rings. What was it called, the AI?
Gutenbot,
not Gollum. Gutenbot. I imagine that those newspapers have got a Gutenbot AI, because that was one of the questions I was going to say. Do we think that the news editor role is going to be AI generated. And it sounds like Gutenbot is doing exactly that. It's selecting the news, trying to generate news that fits the right each title, removing the need for the journalist to tailor every single piece of content, making it quicker. So what do we think is the near future, the next 5-10 years? What do we think is going to happen to the media space? Is it going to become more AI generated, and is that a good or bad thing?
Look, there's no doubt that certain parts of the industry are going to go down that road. I mean, there is no way, in my opinion, that publishers that are currently struggling in the marketplace are going to find a sort of silver bullet that's going to bring back the good times. So the only way that they're going to be able to monetize news better is by spending less in terms of their news gathering operations. So I think they will become more reliant on trusted sources of content. And of course, that does present an opportunity for the PR industry if it can adapt in the way you suggested, actually, Will. If the PR industry could adapt and start producing that kind of content, recognizing there is a necessity to produce content that works for publishers, that isn't brand messaging heavy, all the other challenges that a press release represents, that could become an opportunity rather than a problem. I mean, we have noticed recently, and I won't name any names, but we've noticed a few agencies that are beginning to adopt this. There are several that have started to put page-ready content on the top of their press releases. There is another that has got a chief reporter, right? That's hired a chief reporter and is issuing press releases using that name for exactly this reason. And ultimately we are all I believe we're all in the content production space. We're all telling these stories, producing the content that supports those stories, right? And finding that way through, I think makes a good deal of sense. So to answer your question, Chris, I think that the publishing groups or the publishers, the papers that are very successful because they're behind paywalls and have got a proven business model that's working, I suspect they'll continue to invest in journalism. But I suspect those others that are challenged from a commercial aspect will continue to reduce costs and will deploy AI where they can.
What about local news? Local news worries me. Everybody still wants really great local news, right? Local news. I mean, I'm talking like on the micro level, right? Really, really local, hyperlocal. That's what they call it. Mm-hmm. Hyperlocal news. Everybody still wants that good quality hyperlocal news. I just see the newspapers just getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and it's.
But then is that the role for something like Facebook groups? Because the big area I've seen is hyperlocal Facebook groups, which is almost citizen journalism in effect. Is that where things are going at that kind of hyperlocal level?
Well, I think you raise an interesting point because you say that everybody wants local news, but they're not prepared to pay for it. And I think that's the crucial point in this. I still look back fondly on my days 30 odd years ago working on the Bracknell News, which, I still look back on those years fondly when we used to sell in a small town like Bracknell 26,000 copies. I mean, that's unbelievable today to anybody that 26,000 local residents would go out and buy a broadsheet newspaper. So I think that hyperlocal, I think it is really important. I think that there are a number of providers out there that are trying to do it, but ultimately, until people are prepared to put their hands in their pockets to pay for it, it becomes a challenge. And I think the other thing that needs to be recognised in that regard is that, of course, businesses like SWNS are quite reliant on stuff that comes out from local publications because it's that kind of stuff that they're turning into content for the national media, and it's damaging to every sort of link in the chain, if you will, up to and including the nationals. I think also one of the challenges, and you mentioned the BBC earlier, Chris, is that their amount of investment in local news gathering has been really, really damaging to the local regional media, because if people can find out what's going on in, I think you're in Leeds, aren't you?
Harrogate. We're based in Leeds. Yeah.
If people can find out what's going on in Harrogate by jumping on the BBC, why do they need to go and buy their local paper or go onto their local newspaper site? And that becomes a challenge. And again, I think for really challenging commercial reasons, the big local publishing groups are taking some difficult decisions about what those sites now look like. And I think that, again, is a challenge for all of us, really.
I genuinely feel, my view on this, on localized, hyperlocal news, I genuinely feel if you said to someone, will you pay $1.99 a month, right? If you're listening to me, the bloody light keeps going out. If you're listening to me now, editors, I would say give your news free for the next, and give it in an email format so they get it every day, and get them tied into a habit of getting your email on a freemium model. Copy the big tech companies, give them great free localized content for 2 to 3 months, and then say, do you want our fee is now 99p a month. I think everybody would pay that, and you'd make more money out of 99p a month for your email newsletter for localized brilliant news. And I just don't understand why the big newspapers haven't figured that out, because they could make money. There is money to be made out there if they just think about the model. Just copy the big tech companies. You don't have to. They're such behemoths. That's the problem with these.
The alternative I think would work is micro payments for articles. So rather than a kind of one size fits all subscription, and I've seen that a little bit where you pay 30 pence, 50p to read one article. And actually, if they can figure out a way to do that, I think that could be the way to
or a donation,
or
a donation like Wikipedia, the donation model. I'll be interested. But if it's just a small amount, it doesn't have to be a lot, because lots of small amounts, people will pay for good quality news. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Chris. How can people find you if they want to get in touch with you about what you do?
Well, people can drop me an email at chris.pharo@72point.com. I'm quite happy to receive emails from people if they want to get in touch in that regard, or they can drop me a line on LinkedIn.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for joining us. And thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll see you all in the next episode.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.